Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Notes from Chicago. I'm Ashley Phillips. Today, I'm so excited about our guest. We have the CEO of the Center for Neighborhood Technology, Nina Idemudia. Nina, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about everything Chicago and what I love about it.
Yay. Well, great. Our first question will be, what do you love about Chicago?
Uh, there's a few things that I love about Chicago, and I will say I'm a native Detroiter. I always say that because I love my city, and there's nothing that could ever dissuade me from living my city. But I always say, Chicago and Detroit, we cousins. My maternal grandparents are from Sunflower, Mississippi. A lot of us, through the Great Migration, came up to Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and so I have family in all of these different places around the Midwest. So I hold a special regard for Chicago, even though I'm a East Side Detroit girl at heart. I would say since moving here in 2019, one of the things that I love the most is really just the lakefront, and that the lakefront spans the entire length of the city. And so whether you're at the tippy top in Rogers Park or at the very bottom in deep South Chicago, you have access to the lakefront. Now, what kind of access you have to the lakefront and how accessible or safe that is does depend on where you are. And as an urban planner, of course, I have to think about that. But I would say just access to the water is also just so beautiful. And again, being a Michigander, we have 5 lakes, so Lake Michigan is beautiful. You can't beat like summertime shy sitting, at 31st Street Beach, just chilling out and people watching. It's the best thing ever.
I completely agree, and we're so close. We're almost there. Let's dive into maybe for some of our listeners who are not as familiar, describe what Center for Neighborhood Technology is and what they focus on.
We call ourselves a think and do tank. So we're a bunch of environmentalists, urban planners, researchers, data nerds, people who really just care about information and having that information solve really tough problems. And the problems that we've decided to solve affect vulnerable communities. So this means Black and brown folks, low income folks, people who are disproportionately affected by the built environment. Back in 1978, when we were founded, there were, a college student and a professor at Northwestern, our founders. They saw the environmental movement happening in the 1970s with Black and brown folks being left out of it. And so they decided to concentrate on the south and west sides of Chicago and think about how they could equip those communities, not educate them because they already knew what their issues were. They already knew about environmental racism. They obviously just did not have the resources. And these are struggles that we're still facing today, right? And basically be an anchor nonprofit that could help equip these community groups with the information that they needed to make their case, change policy, and really see their built environments change.
When you think about not just where, but what those inequities are right now, where do you think are like the biggest examples of where you might see that?
Let's say in Chatham, flooding is really intense in Chatham. And there's so many people who, we tell them, hey, the American dream, buy a home, be able to use that home for, to matriculate generational wealth. Well, if we get you into a home, let's say we have a loan program and we're able to get Black and brown families into a home, how do we make sure that they can keep that home if their basement floods every year and then their insurance goes up every year? How are we making sure that burden of, again, just where they were able to buy a house is not also deterring their ability to, again, live this American dream and have generational wealth? That is a little bit of a myth, right? And even when we think about redlining and how that still affects people today, we think about, if you own a home in a certain part of Chicago versus another part of Chicago, let's say we'll just generally say the north side versus the south side of Chicago, you're overvalued by the county assessor. So your taxes are really high, but on the market side, because of racism and institutional racism and redlining, you're undervalued. So then you're not actually, as a Black or brown person who has bought into this system of the American dream and buying a house, is not affordable. Depending on where you live, do you have access to safe, fast, reliable transit?
Yeah.
the good thing about Chicago is that it is very transit rich, but also it's not equitably distributed. Historically, there have been train lines, CTA lines taken away from the South Side, where more resources and more access to public transit have been very densely populated on the north side of Chicago. Businesses, access to different amenities. It has largely been on the south side, although on the north side, although there are swaths of land available on the south and west sides of Chicago. There's a reason that, again, people are not developing there, both systematic and cultural reasons that people are not developing there. So honestly, urban planning affects everybody's life. And it wasn't until I was in college that I understood the language of urban planning and kind of the why behind certain things. But as a child
Yeah.
growing up on the east side of Detroit and taking the public bus from the point in Detroit where I lived to the suburbs where I went to school, I could see every day as the terrain changed, right? Of like, empty lots and trash, or, unkept parks to manicured lawns, parks and recreation facilities. And so like understanding that place is a lived experience that I have, which what is really what makes me good at my job. And then the degrees and planning and all of that is really just giving me the language to change the system, because those who have been affected by unjust systems should be at the table fixing those systems or reimagining them. And that's why I love being at CNT, because CNT has always had that philosophy. And so for the last 2.5 years, CNT and I have been locked in trying to make sure that, again, no matter what zip code you're born into, you have access to opportunity.
When did you connect all of these things? Because I do think that's really interesting to be able to talk and talk about and have that lived experience. And then, you know, uh, not sure when in college, but like when in college you kind of made that connection between, oh, this is, this is my lived experience, and also there's a field or a field of study or a career that I can go into to change things or talk about things, educate people, etc.
I will say this. I'm very grounded in my purpose, which I think comes from just being a Detroiter. My purpose has always been to make more opportunities for the other little Ninas in the world. And so my first job was a waitress at Chili's, and now I'm a CEO of, a 50-year-old nonprofit. And no matter what job I've had, my purpose has been consistent. My tools have been different. On day one of freshman year, decided I was going to do African American studies as my major, and then I added on women's studies later, because growing up in Detroit, I understood the oral history of the civil rights, kind of understanding what resources we had, understanding the mono economy of the car industry. Like I knew this again from my lived experience, but giving me the structure of, oh, I want to study this. I want to understand how people think. I want to understand how systems work. But it wasn't until I got to my junior year of college where I was trying to think, okay, what am I going to do next? I thought I was going to be a professor. I was going to get a PhD in African American studies. I was going to be, a freedom fighter on campus. And I remember my advisor in African American studies, Kathy Weather, she's still there. She was like, oh, Michigan's Department of Planning is recruiting people for their grad program. Would you ever consider urban planning? I think based on what I've seen from you, urban planning would be great for you. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is urban planning? And we Googled it in her office at that moment. And that's when you should trust Google. This is before AI summaries of Google, right? So we're like clicking. And I think we read like a few summaries of like whatever came up as an urban planner. And I was like, sounds like something I could do. All right. And the rest is history. I started to apply to grad school programs in urban planning that next year, and ended up going to the University of Southern California to study urban planning. So it was a little bit of happenstance, but also because I've always been grounded in my purpose since I was a kid, me saying, oh, this is the tool. Like, this is the tool I want to use. And it was because what excited me about urban planning is that although urban planners think about time very like long, urban planning is a long game, right? It takes time to get buildings up. It takes time to build infrastructure. It is also something you can see almost immediately. depending on the types of projects. So I like the balance of I could see something happening right now. Like I can walk around Los Angeles and Chicago and see buildings that I helped to get built, or community parks, or pop courts that I helped to establish, and see those. And then there are projects like I worked on the 2028 Olympics bid when I was at the city of Chicago. It's not 2028
Yeah.
yet, it'll be in 2 years. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of like, oh wow, this thing that I worked on to get this bid so that we could have the Olympics is finally going to happen. And so the duality of that is very fulfilling.
We've talked a lot about where there are a lot of inequities within Chicago in terms of like transit and how the city was planned. And I'm wondering if there are things, or when you think like, what are there bright spots or places that are improving in terms of urban planning for Chicago?
The bright spot has always been its people. One of my most favorite things about Chicago, outside of the lakefront, is how strong of a community infrastructure and kind of community organizing infrastructure that exists in Chicago, because of the lack of planning coming from government and the lack of care coming from government. I mean, you can read any, you can pop open pretty much any history book and kind of learn how, the Daley era, how they formed City Hall, having 50 aldermen, automatic prerogative. I came from California, was like, this is not illegal. Y'all don't get sued for this. The first 6 months of me working in City Hall was like, y'all don't get sued for this. Y'all don't get sued for this. And again, thinking about like the community-based organizations and the organizing power that Chicago has because it's needed to, is something that is so heartwarming. And the fact that communities have been able to, again, be self-determined to say, okay, if we're locked out of this process, this is how we're going to take care of ourselves. This is how we're going to envision our community and work towards that. And I have been so lucky to work with so many different community-based organizations in Chicago whose founders and employees are just so ingrained in what's happening on the ground and providing resources in real time that it does not dissuade them from understanding, like, yes, there's a bigger picture, but what is in my sphere of influence and what can I do now? And that is truly, even in this new kind of second Trump administration, thinking about, all right, we know the federal government is going to be adversarial to a lot of the things that we would like to get, done. Climate resiliency, decarbonization of both cars and buildings, more affordable housing, protecting, our rights to housing and all of those different things. So it's like, okay, what can we do on a state and local level so that we can continue to make progress even amidst a federal government that is hostile. And again, this is not anything new. Even for me, I've gone back and started, reading books about Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction and the Harlem Renaissance. And again, Black and brown folks have been here. We just need to make sure we're talking and learning from our elders, and then also evolving what that looks like, because I think we also are in a moment where it's about movements and not people. We don't need figureheads, in my opinion. We don't need figureheads.
Yeah.
People are imperfect. I see what you can see what happens when figureheads get the head of things. We have one in the White House right now, right? A figurehead who's not qualified or even morally just enough to hold a position like that. And so I think the evolution of what that looks like is very important for this generation. I'm a millennial. I was born in 1990, so I'm very millennial coded. I take all my pictures like this with a peace sign. And so whether it's for millennials, Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha, I think there's a different way that we like to show up in how we represent change. But I think that power, again, comes from our ancestors, and there's a lot of lessons that we need not leave to the wayside in order to get us through this moment.
That's amazing, and I think really heartening to hear. Previously, before you worked for CNT, you were the Chicago Recovery Plan Director for the City of Chicago. How is that work different from what you're doing now?
Working in government was so important for me because I had to learn the language, like an ordinance. how do you write? I've written ordinances for millions of people in Los Angeles and in Chicago. These are laws,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legislator, but I have written zoning code,
Mm-hmm.
land use code for millions of people, and that makes a difference. Even how I write code based on my lived experience to say, oh,
Yeah.
there's a loophole here, or this is going to disproportionately affect a certain group of people. Let me make sure I put some protections in this law or in this ordinance, right? Or even when I'm making recommendations to elected officials, I'm doing that through a lens of equity and saying, this is as a practitioner, because I am a certified planner, but also as a person who has lived this, here is what I'm presenting to you, and here's the sound data behind it. So, like, in government, it's very fast paced. It is very obviously political, especially in Chicago.
Yeah.
Um, but it is a very important part of my professional development, because understanding how to speak the language of like legislators and change makers helps me be that much more effective now that I'm at C&T, which is my first stint in the nonprofit world, which has its own, the nonprofit industrial complex is also not fun. Begging white people for money to do things that we should be doing is not fun. Like,
Yeah.
if any of my funders are listening, it's not fun. Um, but it also gives me the flexibility to be innovative in a way that government doesn't allow, because it's very stringent, right? We have budgets, we put those budgets in once a year.
Yeah.
You're kind of like fighting to get your money. And in nonprofit, we're fighting in a different way, but I have more flexibility. Maybe it's like, oh, we have this idea for a community, that a community group brought to us. Let's go see if somebody will fund this, or let's go see if we can raise the money for this so that we can do it more instantaneously. We also don't have to worry about the nuances and the rules that also confine, government employees. Like, can we talk about DEI? Can I say this
Yeah.
word? Can I say the word climate change? Like, now I don't have to worry about that being on the outside, but am still an ally and a trusted partner to both practitioners in government and then community. So it's nice to be that bridge and have the freedom to be that bridge in a way that is actually going to be transformational.
If you could wave a magic wand and change a policy in Chicago, what would it be?
Ooh. If I could change a policy in Chicago, I would probably make ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units, by right
Mhm.
everywhere. So that there could be kind of like the sprout of more naturally occurring affordable housing. There would be stipulations on it, though. I would have protections.
Wait. So what's an accessory dwelling unit?
Oh, accessory dwelling unit. So think about this. So it's kind of like multi-generational housing. So think about a granny flat. Some people call them granny flats. So it's like, oh, my basement is now a unit, and it's
Oh
actually
yeah.
a unit by itself that maybe has a separate door, and somebody could live
Mhm.
there, right? An underutilized basement, and a family lives on the first floor. Or you convert your garage into, again, a standalone housing unit so that people can live there. And
Mhm.
then, the family, so it provides economic stability for the anchor tenant, like the person, a
Mhm.
family who owns the main house, and then provides some type of income so that they can supplement their
Mhm.
income for their housing. But usually those types of units are also more affordable naturally because of the size and the scale. So
Yeah.
and people usually rent to their neighbors or the person down the street who they know, or a student who's at the college that, a few miles down the road. And so that's what accessory dwelling units are. And so those are legal in Chicago, but only in certain places right now, because obviously,
Hmm.
the politics of which aldermen want those types of things in their ward and which ones don't. And so that's something that I would just make, like, yes, all of Chicago is allowed to have accessory dwelling units with certain protections. I would also have bus rapid transit tomorrow. I bought a house on the southwest side in Archer Heights, which is like 10 minutes away from Midway. I live like 3 blocks away from the Orange Line. If I want to get to Logan Square, I have to
Oh.
take the train into the loop and then go to the blue line. There's not a direct way for us to get, north and south very easily. And so
Mhm.
bus rapid transit, where there is a dedicated bus lane for buses, they don't have to, wait for cars. Sometimes they don't even have to wait for the same signals as cars, depending on how the bus lane is constructed, or if they have priority. The light will turn green as they get closer. Those are the types of things that are absolutely possible. In fact, CTA did a study along Ashland, I believe, and maybe Western years ago, but it didn't come to fruition. And so these are things that CNT is actually advocating for in this moment. So I will say I'm giving you things that CNT already advocates for.
Yes.
But yeah, like bus rapid transit is something that what we call our transportation equity network, which is made up of over 40 community-based organizations as members, and not all of them have a mission about transit, but all of their constituents need transit in order to access opportunity. Sure. And so our transportation equity network actually did a field trip to Madison, Wisconsin, and saw their bus rapid transit. And so like those are things that are completely possible, could happen with a quick legislative change. Or a quick kind of infusion of resources in a very short term. So those are two things I would say: accessory dwelling units and bus rapid transit.
How far away do you think we are from achieving either one of those?
Honestly, not that far. I think it does take a little bit more political will. We do have a mayoral race coming up. Johnson definitely has a more progressive policy agenda, right? And I hate that they even have to be named progressive policy agendas to be like, oh, we need naturally occurring affordable housing, or we need to get people places cheaper and better, right? I know in New York, they're like socialist mayor because he wants free buses. It's like, oh, where are we as a society where like free buses are like socialist, communist behavior? So I do think it's actually possible. I mean, we've been talking to our government counterparts about this. Like I said, CNT has done literally a physical field trip to see, and CTA was there. We had all the, kind of agencies that are important, and we had our community members there talking to each other and seeing this in real time, seeing what's possible. So I say it's actually not that far down the road, but I will say it's going to take these listeners, the people who aren't even listening to this, to really be advocating with their aldermen, going to CTA meetings or writing letters and saying, hey, we really want this. We want you to prioritize this. This is why we elected you, or this is why we chose you. We want these types of things. And it could happen a lot quicker than probably people suspect. So yeah, I would say that if we are able to get the political will and the resources, this could be done in this decade if we wanted it to.
I hope so. And particularly in the bus rapid transit piece, like it seems wild, particularly when you go to other cities like Madison and you see it. It seems wild that we don't have it. Like it seems like it would be a huge help and doesn't require obviously as much infrastructure effort as it would to build another train line or sort of, expand it in that way. You're hosting Planner with Purpose in Detroit. Tell us a little bit about that and when it is.
So, there's Nina, the CEO of CNT, and then there's Nina, the practitioner. I was actually on the national board for the American Planning Association, which is the largest association of planners. We have like 50,000 members, I think, for somewhere between 40 and 50,000 members. We also, APA also administers the accreditation. So I'm an AICP planner. So if you're an accredited planner, you also get this. I've been a member of the American Planning Association for 13 plus years, and I've always held a leadership position in APA. APA is still an institution. It is an institution that has, just like I said, the history of planning and being a tool of white supremacy does not, that is a part of APA history, right? Because we are the accrediting body. So I had a 4-year term. I actually decided to resign early. I resigned in December of 2025 because I felt as though our organization was not meeting the moment when it came to really thinking about how the Trump administration was affecting our industry and being more proactive about what that looked like, both on a macro and micro scale. I wrote an essay about it, and I was like, what, I'm going to write an essay about it. It's called Why Black Women Are Walking Away. And I talked about my experience of like being in this institution and feeling like I am giving a lot of time and effort into this institution because I believe in it and I believe in like helping planners, but it's not necessarily doing the things that it needs to do because that's how it's designed. Institutions are designed to protect themselves, not necessarily to protect the people who need you most. And so from that, I was, in tears, very distraught. And I was like, you know what? I am putting all of this energy into being heard in a institution that's not interested in hearing me, when I could be putting that energy into providing the resources that I think need to be had for the community that I care about. So the National Planning Conference happens every year. It is in Detroit this year. I knew that years ago, so I was like, "Oh yeah, in Detroit, I'm going to do something." But it wasn't until December that I was like, "You know what? Let me actually do something." So I decided to create an activation that is alongside the National Planning Conference. So it starts a day and a half before the actual conference starts, and only overlaps for a day or two. But I decided to create this event, this activation, to one, center the experiences of Black planners and planners of color, bring resources to planners that I feel like they need. So, like, the very first event is a personal finance workshop for planners. Because in early 2025, when the Trump administration's executive orders came down, $1 million worth of C&T's contracts, not grants, contracts, because we contract with the federal government, again, to work with their practitioners of helping with Federal Highway Administration, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy. These are all contracts, and they stopped because of the Trump administration, which meant that so that happened in January. By April, I had to lay off 25% of our staff.
I'm so
And that
sorry.
was heartbreaking. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my career, because I had to look at these 5 people and say, it's not because we did anything crazy. In fact, 2024 was a great year for us. It wasn't
Yeah.
because, you didn't do your job accurately. It's because of this administration's attack on whatever they deemed to be DEI that day.
Yeah.
And so, taking my organization through that, we really had to channel our grief into redefining who we were as an organization. And I think I wanted to take that same grief and channel that into the resources that I could give other planners. And so, like, having a personal finance workshop is not something that you would typically see at a conference. But it was important to me to provide that service, because somebody has to provide, like, we know people need it, somebody has to provide. So that's just one of like 8 events that's happening in this 4 day period. And we're really excited about it. We're going to have a book talk on this book called The Banks We Deserve, which is about community banking. And it was written by Oscar Adebo, who is a main contributor to nextcity.org, which is a publication that a lot of practitioners listen to. So there's all sorts of events that are happening. C&T is also going to do a workshop on our tools and impact frameworks. And so basically it's me curating a kind of unconference alongside this very big conference, in order to, again, bring resources to the folks that I think need them. And that came from, again, this pain of like, wow, this institution is not, living up to its values, its own stated values, and it's definitely not living up to mine. How do I redirect? And that's how I've decided to redirect. The event is completely free. Every single event is free. I have been fundraising, putting my energy in, making calls, saying, hey, this is important, you should invest in this so that we can make it as accessible as possible. And so I'm really, really excited about it. It starts April 23rd, and goes through April 26th. And like I said, there's several events. You can go to, if anybody's interested, you can either go to my Substack, which is A Planner with a Purpose, to find out more information, or you can find me on Instagram and TikTok, also A Planner with a Purpose, and you can find all the information that you need there.
Amazing, Nina. Thanks. That's great. That sounds really exciting. And hopefully and I think, well, not hopefully, but it will be helpful based on everything that you just said for planners. So we're almost at the end of our time. But I wanted to ask you, we always end the episode with this question. When people come visit you in Chicago, or friends come from LA, or friends come from Detroit, what are the things you tell them that they have to go do or they have to see?
Ooh, okay. So I'm gonna give you, like, you got a little bit of money, and then I'm gonna give you the free version.
Okay,
So,
great. Love this.
so like, I usually, like, I'm a planning nerd, so I'm like, let's go on an architecture tour. The architecture tours,
Sure.
depending on where you go, it could be like $50. Maybe you ain't got that, but if you have like a few dollars, if you have, I think, take the water taxi. So
Yes.
you can take the water taxi, just don't get off and go back to your stop. I would start in Chinatown, at, what's it called? What's the name of the park there?
Ping, ping, tam, ping, tam, ping.
somebody will comment it. Yes, start in the park at Chinatown. It's beautiful, and the flowers, and it's just so much going on. Take the water taxi around, and you can take the same kind of self-guided architecture tour for way less. But obviously, it is nice to have somebody telling you which buildings are which if you do take an architectural tour. So that's definitely something I always tell people. I always say, like, let's go to the lake, especially if it's warm, because it's beautiful and everybody's at the lake. You know, especially on a amazing weather day, everybody's at the lake. You can people watch, you can lay in the grass, you can lay in the sand, and you can see lots of things. And the third thing is festivals, going to the different neighborhood summer festivals and kind of farmers markets. I love doing that in the summer and just picking a new neighborhood to go to and explore and kind of get a sense of, like, yeah, what are their small businesses selling? What, these earrings I got from a farmer's market. I love just being with people. Yeah, as planners specifically, we talk about community as if we are distant from it, when I am community. I am also speaking for myself and also the others around me. So, like, you can't be in community if you're not actually physically in community. You have to be talking to people. You have to know your neighbors' names. You have to be going and supporting, your block club, party. Like, we have one here in Bronzeville where I live with my partner. So those are really important things, and those are the types of things that I try to showcase to folks when they come into town.
I love it, Nina. Those are all so fun, and I agree with all of them. Well, thank you so much for coming on and spending the time. This was really great.
No, thank you. Thank you. And if you're a listener out there, check us out, cnt.org, cnt.org/donate. If you feeling, you want to put your money somewhere where the outcome, you can see the outcome. Shameless plug. But obviously, if you're out there and you're feeling like overwhelmed, or you're feeling like, man, this is really chaotic, that's okay. That's normal. Ground yourself in what your purpose is, and then find out what is in your sphere of influence for what you can do in this moment. And if we all do that, then we'll be okay. So that's the last message I want to leave your listeners.
That's an amazing message, and that's a great one to end on. Thanks so much, Nina. Thank you for listening to Notes from Chicago. This podcast is edited and produced by Tanisha Blakely. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Notes from Chicago on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.